You may be seated. Our kids can be dismissed. There's great things down the hall for them. To the rest of you, thank you so much for being here at Community Christian Church today. Croesus was the king of Lydia, and he had wealth that was the stuff of legend. Maybe you've heard about him. He minted the first gold coins with standardized purity that could be used by the general population. There's still a saying, if somebody is really wealthy, that they are as rich as Croesus. And King Croesus's capital was Sardis. It was first and foremost a military stronghold. Its fortress was located on a plateau. It stood about 1,500 feet above a main road, and it was so uniquely situated in the hills and the cliffs that it was considered impenetrable. And in his conquest for always more, King Croesus tried to conquer the king of Persia, Cyrus. And he was warned not to do this, but he failed to heed the warning. He went to the oracle of Delphi, and she told him, if you cross the river Halys, you will destroy a great empire. That's what she told him. He never once considered that the empire that he would destroy would be his own. And so he took his armies to Cyrus across the river Halys, and he was absolutely routed. He thought to himself, no problem, I will retreat to my impenetrable fortress that is Sardis. I will regroup and I will fight again. But as Croesus retreated, Cyrus actually followed him, and he waged his own war on Sardis. And he knew that this fortress was impossible to conquer, and so he offered a special reward to anyone who could find a way in. There was a soldier named Heroides, and he was watching one day the fortress from 1,500 feet below, and he saw a Sardinian soldier drop his helmet down the wall of rock that separated them. And then he watched as this soldier climbed down the precipice to retrieve his helmet and then make his way back up the fortress. And so that night he took a small party and he scaled the wall in the exact spot that he had seen the Sardinian soldier do so. And they reached the top, and to their shock, here's what they found. No one at the entry to this fortress. No one was on guard, not even one guard. Croesus and his soldiers never thought in a million years that they would need to guard that spot. No one will ever get in there, and they were wrong. And Sardis fell to Cyrus the Persian. After Cyrus took over Sardis, he implemented kind of a re-education campaign. He forbade any Sardinian to possess weapons. He took all the weapons away. He forbade any people to wear normal work clothes. Instead, they were to wear tunics and buskins. Now, that's more like costumes, basically. It would be like us in our day being commanded to wear slides instead of work boots, that kind of thing. Cyrus ordered the people to teach all of their sons how to play the lyre and how to write songs and how to dance. He ordered them to be trained for desk jobs. And what that did over time was it took away any fight they had left. And so Sardis was turned into a city of flabby people. And it wasn't long before it was just a city of degenerates. There's a famous line that has gained traction recently. It's from a novel called Those Who Remain by G. Michael Hoff. And maybe you've heard this line. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. That's the story of Sardis. That's actually the playbook for how to ruin a society, and it's not new. After Croesus, this flabby Sardis that was left was forgotten about for about 2 centuries, and then Alexander the Great stepped in, and under Alexander the Great, the city became rich again and important in Greek culture, but then the very same thing happened. Alexander passed away, and enemies came calling, and wouldn't you know it, they found that same spot in that same rock wall, and they climbed up in that same spot again, and for the second time, there was no guard whatsoever. Sardis didn't learn its lesson, and Sardis fell again because it failed to keep watch. We're at letter number 5 of 7. that Jesus has John write to 7 churches. John is given a revelation. It just means uncovering. And he's given this uncovering, this revelation of the person of Jesus. And Jesus comes to him and he says, I want you to write what you see and what you're told. And I want you to write to 7 churches: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And all these churches get a word directly from Jesus. And because they got a word directly from Jesus, we do too. Because these letters are just as much for us as they were for them. And so as he opens this letter to the church in Sardis, Jesus calls himself the one who has the 7 spirits of God. What's that? Oh my goodness. Well, we get help in Revelation chapter 5, verse 6. It says this, the 7 spirits of God. And that verse says that the 7 spirits of God are the 7 eyes of God that go out all over the earth. Now that helps, doesn't it? It's about God's watchful and informed presence. It's a description of God that reinforces the idea that he knows everything. And so here's Jesus writing this letter, and he says, I have the 7 spirits of God. Just like God sees everything, I see everything. And unlike the city of Sardis, I'm never slack. I'm never complacent. I'm never absent from my post. Instead, I am vigilant. If the enemy is scaling the wall, I know about it. I'm never asleep. But he says to the church in this place, you are asleep. You have the reputation, or some of your versions say the name. You have the name of someone who is alive, but you're not. You're dead. On a November day, there's a guy named Jim Solkers who was a 53-year-old retired municipal worker in Canada. And he climbed into bed, he pulled the covers up, and he died. 2 years later, 2 years later, if you know, you know. 2 years later, police were finally called by some concerned relatives. I don't know how concerned they could have been if it took them 2 years, but they called. And the police went into Solker's apartment and found his body in bed, now in a completely mummified state. There was food in his fridge. It had quite spoiled, right? The wall calendar on his wall needed flipped for 2 years, but everything else in his tidy 1-bedroom apartment was just exactly like the day it was when he died. And the question for everyone was, how in the world did this guy's death go unnoticed? Well, for one, Jim was reclusive. He didn't really have any friends to speak of. He was also estranged from his family members. That tells you why it took them 2 years to notice. And then Jim had a medical condition that actually prevented his body from decomposing in the normal way and emitting odors. And so his neighbors didn't smell anything. And on top of all of this, he had automatic banking set up. So every month, his disability pension was dropped into his account, and every month, his auto drafts paid all of his utilities and his bills. The investigators came in, and they said of dead Jim, for all practical purposes, this man was alive, even though he was dead. He was functioning, paying his bills, keeping his heat on. I guess he had a slot in his door for the mail, and it just piled up. No one who came across Jim's name had any reason to believe anything except that he was alive and well. But Jim was dead in his bed. Ephesus is a church that had lost its first love. We talked about that. Smyrna, the church there was facing persecution. In Pergamum and Thyatira, the problems were idolatry and immorality. And Jesus comes to this church in Sardis, and he says this, from all outward appearances, it looks like you're alive, that you're living. The fridge is running, the gas bills are current, the light is on. It's like you're functioning and alive, but you're not. Just like Jim, you're really dead. And that's a problem. we have to put a puzzle piece or two together to work out why Jesus would say this. Why in the world would he write and call them dead? And we get a hint, I think, as we move down to the close of the letter. Jesus's promises to those who conquer, we've read those in each letter, and that's our word Nike, right? Conquer. And this promise is, to the one who conquers, I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. And that line is actually an echo of something that Jesus has said before in Matthew chapter 10. Jesus says, so everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. It's possible here that Jesus makes this promise precisely because this was the issue that had stopped the hearts of the believers in Sardis. Maybe what Jesus is doing here is he's calling them dead because they have stopped acknowledging or confessing his name to the people around them. And if so, that would explain why everything seemed so normal from the outside, but inside was just dust and a rotting corpse. I want you to imagine that you're crawling through the desert. I want you to imagine that you're scorched, you're near death, you're dying of thirst, but you come across a sign in the middle of the desert, and it says this: cool, clear, life-giving water just 2 miles that way. Well, that's all you need for some renewed energy. You can make it 2 miles across the sand, and you do. And when you get to the place, there's this magnificent building. The sun is shining off its mirrored stone finish. It's a radiant building. It's an inviting place. The doors are open. It says, come on in, and you go on in. And there in the center of the main room is a well. And just like the sign said, it's not an ordinary well, but very ornate with fine stonework and masonry, and it's lit up by spotlights from each corner, and there's a bucket. The bucket is gold, and it has this fancy wooden handle, and it's tied to the finest rope that you can have ever seen, and it's ready for you to drop into the well and quench your thirst and give life back to your body. And so with the last bit of strength you have left, you drop that bucket into the well, you wait for a splash. But the splash never comes. There's just a thud as the bucket hits the bottom. And you're dehydrated by this time. You're a little delirious, and so you think you're hearing things. So you reel the bucket back in, but there's no water at all. Only dust. Dust that cannot quench your thirst or save your life. And so the very place that offered you hope now destroys it. That's not a very far-fetched little tale. Think about the unbelievers dying in the desert of sin and lostness in Sardis. They are separated from God. They hear that there might be some hope. Maybe some hope in a man named Jesus. And so they go to check it out. They're after hope. They're after life. They need living water. They need the bread of life. But when they step into the church in Sardis, there's no one confessing the name of Jesus. It looked promising from the outside, but inside the church there is only ritual. There's just fancy words that end up being empty at the end of the day. They need to hear about what Jesus did, who he is, but there's no Jesus to be found. There's no help. There's no hope. And the very place that offered life now destroys it. And Jesus has a right to step in and call that kind of place dead. In his evaluation of Sardis, there's no talk of Jesus about persecution, about anything weird doctrinally. There are no doctrinal issues. There's nothing to commend them for. The problem with a dead body is that it really doesn't do anything, right? Actually, a dead body is done doing things. That's the problem. There are no works to even evaluate here. And if there's no one confessing Jesus, then there's also no aggressiveness in their witness for Jesus, and there's certainly no gospel advancement into enemy territory in that place. A church that is truly alive in some form will always be under attack. There will always be some sort of pushback by the enemy if we're really threatening Satan's domain, but that's not the case in Sardis. Here's a church that has lost its heartbeat. There's no pulse. It got into bed and it pulled the covers up and it just died. And to this, Jesus says, wake up. The word can also mean watch out. If we want to be literal, Jesus really says here, chase away the sleep. That's hard to do sometimes. To people in Sardis who knew their city had been sacked and pillaged because they fell asleep and they failed to keep watch. Oh, Jesus' words must have seemed like the sword that he said they would be. On March 19th in 2005, a resident at an extended care facility in British Columbia, Canada, they're all from Canada today, she died. So the medical personnel did what they usually did. They placed a call to Fraser Health Authority, and they sent a driver to pick up the deceased woman, and the driver went in and did his job and dutifully transported the body of an elderly woman to the hospital morgue. The problem was, the driver never checked her wristband for ID, and he carried off the wrong woman. The 87-year-old lady he wheeled away to the morgue was just asleep. Even after he left her on a gurney in the hall of the morgue, she was still fast asleep. Meanwhile, back at the nursing home, an employee noticed that the deceased resident was still in her room, but the very alive roommate was not in her room. She was now gone. And so that employee called the hospital, and they laughed about the mix-up, and they finally got the right people to the right places, both the dead and the living. And the article never said whether the alive lady ever woke up. I don't know. She might have slept through the whole thing. The problem with being asleep is that you just never know what's going to happen. Yeah? In the New Testament, there is hardly a command that appears more often than this one. Wake up. Watch out. Those are just two different words for the very same idea. Here's a sample. Romans 13. The hour has come for you to wake up from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first believed. The night is far gone, the day is at hand. What's the message? Wake up. 1 Corinthians 16. Be watchful. Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. Be strong. What's the message? Wake up. Ephesians 5:14. Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Following Jesus has the luxury of being in an impenetrable fortress. Here's why. There's nothing that the enemy can do to undo the gospel. The work of Jesus on our behalf is done. He has won. It's already done. And so we live inside this gospel fortress that is impervious, indestructible, indefatigable. I love that word. And yet, the instruction we're given more than any other in Scripture is wake up, watch out. Somehow it's possible in this crazy, secure citadel of Jesus for the enemy to get in and to take what isn't his. And if he gets in, we are in danger then of dying. It may seem like everything is still good on the outside. The castle gate is locked up, but inside there's just a dead corpse. And so the task is to be awake and watchful. It's mentioned so much in Scripture that it has to be the constant attitude of the Christian life. And so let me show you some of these scriptures and what it is exactly that we are to watch out for. Here's the first one. 1 Peter chapter 5, it says, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Be sober-minded. Be watchful. Why? Because your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. First, watch out for the lies of Satan. That's what we need to watch out for. And there are two ways that Satan will devour you and that you have to wake up to and watch out for each day. Here they are, temptation and accusation. Those are his two main tactics. When Satan tempts you, he's lying to you so that you have too high a view of yourself and too high a view of God's love, so then you do things that you shouldn't do. When Satan accuses you, it's just the opposite. He accuses you and he points his finger at you so that you have too low a view of yourself and too low a view of God's holiness, and so you do things that you shouldn't do. And Sardis is an example of what can happen when we don't guard the castle. Always be on the lookout. Satan wants nothing more than to seduce you away from your loyalty to Jesus. Here's the second thing. Wake up and watch out for false teaching. In Acts chapter 20, Paul is with the elders in Ephesus for the very last time, and he warns them of this very thing. Be on your guard against false teaching. Weigh the words of the people against the gospel, and if those words are off, correct those teachers or send those teachers packing. The gospel of Jesus is the story of Jesus, who he is and what he's done. And we add anything to it, meaning our works, our efforts, our attempts at righteousness, and it ceases to be the gospel. It's the cross and nothing else. And so wake up and watch out and keep it that way. There's a connect the dot here that I love, and it is this, that Paul says that those words to the Ephesian elders. Now, they got a letter, didn't they? Do you remember what Jesus commended them for in that letter all these years later? He says, he applauds them for testing those who called themselves apostles but were not. He says, well done. You found them to be false. You stood guard. You stayed awake. You've been alert for the savage wolves that have come in, and you were ready for them, and you've stopped them, and as a result, it's not you that's dead, it's them. Here's the third thing. Wake up and watch out for the coming of Jesus. Matthew chapter 24, Jesus says, therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. The same words are found in Mark chapter 13. Jesus is talking about his return again, and he says, therefore stay awake, for if you do not know when the master of the house will come in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows or in the morning, you don't know that. And he might come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, stay awake. Paul talks about the return of the Lord being like a thief in the night in 1 Thessalonians. And he says this, so let us then not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. None of us knows when the second coming will be. None of us knows the minute, the hour, the day that the switch for eternity will get flipped. Augustine said this, the last day is a secret that every day must be watched. Live every day as if it's our last, constantly awake, watching for Jesus to come. And in this letter to Sardis, Jesus tells us what will happen if we refuse to wake up and watch out. He says he'll come like a thief. Thieves don't make appointments. Thieves come when you least expect. If you fall asleep, if you stop keeping watch, then Jesus may come while you're off in the morgue hallway. That can happen. Fail to wake up, and you'll be considered dead. Here's the last idea about waking up and watching out. Don't ever forget that as we watch out for Jesus, Jesus is watching us. He sees everything. He has the 7 spirits of God, right? And there are 2 possibilities of what Jesus will see when he starts watching us. Both are in this letter. One possibility is that he watches us and he says this, I have not found your works complete in the sight of my God. What does that mean? In a church I worked in long ago and far, far away, we had just built a worship center, and it was also kind of a gym, and fellowship space too, and it was all nice and great. And the day we finished and officially dedicated that building, our minister got up on stage and he was excited and he said some great words of celebration. And in the middle, he said this. Now, I don't want to alarm you, but as I was walking around the building after it was done, I found these. And he held out in his hand a couple of really big and long steel bolts and the oversized nuts that went with them. And then they were obviously the bolts that were used to hold the steel beams together. And he looked up at that main beam as if to say, I hope they're not missing up there, right? And we all laughed. And the longer we laughed, the more nervous our laughter got because we thought, oh no, what if they really are missing up there? Just a good-sized wind and the building is toast. That's the kind of incomplete works that Jesus is talking about here. It's not about the incomplete works of love or service as if the believers in Sardis just failed to finish something and they need more time to get it done. No. This is about works being incomplete because a crucial piece is missing. A bolt is missing from the beam. And without that critical piece, it doesn't matter how much time you have, the work will never be complete. What's the missing piece here? Let's go back to this confession idea that we talked about earlier. The work of Jesus, the work that he could be referring to here is the work of confessing his name. And if it's that, then we get immediately why their work isn't complete in the sight of God. It's because their work is missing the crucial piece it needs of confessing Jesus. Without that, it doesn't matter what other kind of work you do. It won't matter. And so people who are lost in Sardis are bumping shoulders with Christians and they're coming to church services, but no one is ever telling them what Jesus has done for them. They don't learn about the forgiveness of sins that is available because of the cross. They don't learn about the oneness that they can have with God because Jesus can be their Savior and their Lord. That story is not being told. His name is not being confessed. People are coming looking for a bucket of living water, but all they're getting is a bucket full of dust. And Jesus is the missing piece, and without that piece, there's no chance of their work ever being complete. Here's the other possibility when Jesus watches us, what he might see. He watches us with the eyes of the seven spirits of God, and he might say to us this, it's the other possibility. You haven't soiled your garments. You are worthy. And now you get to walk with me in white. What Jesus is watching for is for works that prove we're alive. He's not necessarily looking for works that prove us to be righteous. He's not watching for good deeds that somehow outweigh bad deeds. He's just looking for the evidence that we aren't dead. What is that evidence? The thing about Jesus is this, that he takes death and he wrings its neck. Paul says that by his resurrection, Jesus takes the sting out of death. The sting out of death. Usually, there's poison in things that sting. And so what he's saying is that any poison that death once had is now nullified by the cross and the resurrection. Jesus walked out of a tomb alive and he took away death's poison. And all the way the benefits of the way the benefits of the cross and the resurrection get applied to us then is not from all the good works we do. No. It's in trusting the work that Jesus has already done. It's again about confessing his name, acknowledging that he is the Savior of the world, sent to die on a cross and forgive sins, trusting that because he defeated death, his promise to us is true, and we can defeat death as well. Why can Jesus call these people with white robes worthy? It's not based on what they accomplished. It's not their goodness. It's not their decency. It's not their moral code. No. He calls them worthy because they've put their faith in the only one who is worthy. They've confessed Jesus as Lord. The church in Sardis was found dead. And the thing Jesus wants the most for it is to bring it back to life. And that's what he does best. For that to happen is quite simple. Turn to the author of life, confess Jesus, and trust in his work. There are two groups here. With one group, Jesus sees life because he sees people who have trusted in the giver of life. In the other group, he sees death because he sees people who have yet to trust him fully. And one group is asleep, and Jesus will come against them when they least expect. The other group gets to walk with Jesus in white robes, made worthy and righteous by his blood, and they get to do the very thing that they had hoped for all along, which is to walk with Jesus in white. In Persian courts in this day, the king's most trusted and favorite people were given a special privilege. They were invited to walk the royal gardens with the king. The people that king loved the most were invited in, and they would take these walks in the garden, and they were welcome to walk with him like this. And they were called the companions of the gardens. And that's what those who conquer have to look forward to. Walking with Jesus in white in the Garden of Paradise, no doubt, no doubt. That'll be the best walk you ever take. After church, they were at home, having heard a sermon on the second coming, much like this one, and a little girl was quizzing her mother. She said, "Mommy, do you believe that Jesus will come back?" "Yes, yes, I do." "Could he come this week?" "Yeah." "Could he come today?" "Yeah." "Could he come in the next hour?" "Yes." "Could he show up at the door in the next few minutes?" "Yes." She processed that for a second. Her eyes got wide. And she asked her mommy, "Would you comb my hair? Don't be caught dead today. Wake up, watch out, and walk in white."